Week 6, Lesson 6, Science Fiction Comics. Another long overdue topic for these videos to tackle is science fiction in comics. Science plays a huge part in comics, so there should be no wonder that there were comics completely dedicated to science fiction. Like most other comics, science fiction comics started out as strips in the newspapers. The first known science fiction comic was Mr. Skygack from Mars. First appearing in October 1907, Mr. Skygack was comics' first known alien. He was created by artist Armando Drybach Kondo, or A.D. Kondo for short. He lived from 1872 to 1956. Appearing in over 400 comics, Mr. Skygack from Mars consisted of single-panel jokes, with the words above or below the panels, like the comics in Punch magazine. He is often seen writing in his notebook trying to understand strange Earth customs, like taking care of crying babies or playing music. The first non-comedic science fiction comic was Buck Rogers, as shown in the comic Amazing Stories. Buck Rogers was an adventure comic about a man named Buck Rogers who woke up 500 years in the future. And in all honesty, his stories are horribly dated. The parody of the character, Duck Dodgers, is one of the few instances where the parody of the source material outdoes it in almost every respect. Even superhero comics used elements of science fiction to justify their characters' powers. Remember that Superman was an alien who was sent to Earth, and the explanation given to readers for his great strength and ability to leap long distances, at least when he first appeared, was that he came from a larger planet than Earth, with much heavier gravity. And the comic showed animals in nature, like ants or grasshoppers, using amazing strengths to accomplish similar feats. While powers were not well researched on how they'd be possible in the real world, they separated themselves from fantasy by pretending to be science. In the original Green Lantern, it was pretty much accepted that the ring was magic. The ring originally came out of a meteor, so there was always a possibility of alien influence, but it was played up as straight magic. The new Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, had the exact same powers and limitations as the original, but this time, the ring was an alien technology that our brains couldn't understand. No real-world explanation was given to how the ring could construct objects from light or cause a wearer to fly. Magic had just been replaced by technology. There were, however, comics dedicated to telling standalone science fiction stories. One of the longest-running science fiction series from the golden age of comics was from a publisher named Fiction House. This series was called Planet Comics. Planet Comics lasted from 1940 until 1953, producing 73 issues. It was an anthology comic that took a lot of inspiration from pulp novels and movie serials of the day. We could see aspects of Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, and John Carter books from the Edgar Rice Burroughs series, as well as science fiction films like Metropolis. They aren't using science fiction as much as they are using a space setting. Most of the time, the men would run around with lots of their skin exposed. Zeppelin-looking vehicles are used to transport people, and little to no actual research has been done for the science behind these comics. These are science fiction stories, and as far as I can tell, excluding science fiction superheroes like Superman, Planet Comics was the most successful science fiction anthology comic from the Golden Age. After the Cold War heated up in 1950 with the Korean War, quite a few science fiction titles popped up from smaller publishers, but most of those did not last too long. They were getting beaten in the market by crime, horror, and romance titles. EC Comics had Weird Fantasy and Weird Science, two series that dealt heavily in science fiction-themed titles. They complemented the other works in EC's lineup. But they were not selling as well as the other genres. This could be seen throughout the comic book industry, with what the numbers of the horror titles and crime titles were compared to the numbers of science fiction titles being sold. But once the Comic Code Authority implemented strict rules designed to neuter the horror and crime titles, and severely limiting what could be done with the romance genre, the only non-superhero genre that was selling and had some flexibility was the science fiction genre. We went through EC's problems with its science fiction title in the Comic Code Authority video. It led to William Gaines shutting down all but one of his comics. As mentioned in the previous video for this week, DC Comics started doing more science fiction concepts with its superhero stories. But the company that really got into science fiction comics was Atlas. Timely Comics changed its name to Atlas Comics in 1950. This would last until 1957. Like other major publishers, the controversy and the Comic Code Authority led them to drop their crime titles. The restrictions of the code made horror comics completely ineffective. But they could still do twist endings like the type EC was known for. They just had to change the horror setting into a science fiction setting. This led to the creation of books with titles like Tales to Astonish, Strange Tales, and Journey into Mystery. Let's take a look at Tales to Astonish, issue number 13. Right up in the corner, we see that this is approved by the Comic Code Authority. The subtitle is, I Challenge Groot, the monster from Planet X. We see a giant tree monster who takes up most of the cover. He is centered in the page. His roots are grabbing onto things, but he is not impaling anyone, suffocating people, or crushing them. Behold! I am Groot, the Invincible! Who dares defy me? And the bottom left corner on the opposite edge of the page, we see a man who responds, I defy you, Groot! I shall destroy you before midnight! Like the Egyptian painting in the Bayeux Tapestry, the size is disproportionate. Groot is the most powerful, and so he is the largest. The Defiant Man is the second largest character on the cover of the comic. All the other humans on the cover are minuscule compared to them. Size is used to convey the importance of the individuals. For those of you wondering, this is the same Groot as the one that was seen in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. So he didn't start out as a lovable plant who is friendly with forest creatures. In the title page, we get a taste of what will happen in the story. The event in this page is taken out of chronological order, and was put in the first page so that when someone opened the book, they'd see a big image of what they were going to get in that issue. This is a sales tactic, and one that was often used in Silver Age comics. You can't see it well on this picture, but in the bottom right corner, we see the signature of Jack Kirby and Dick Ayers, with Jack Kirby doing pencils and Ayers doing the inks. Although he's not credited here, Stan Goldberg was the person who did the coloring. The writer and plotter are not credited here. This was a problem of the Silver Age. Many comic books didn't credit everyone who worked on them, so it can be very hard to properly credit the creators. It's believed that either Stan Lee or his brother, Larry Lieber, wrote this comic. So, what happens in this story? Groot crash lands in a backwater American town and explains to all the people in it that he's going to capture them and take their city back to his people where they will be studied and experimented upon. Understandably, the people fight back, but their weapons are no match against Groot. Even fire does not hurt him. It is up to Leslie Evans, who's wearing a Clark Kent-style glasses and hat, to save the day. He goes back to his lab and breeds termites, which destroy Groot. Termites! I never thought of that. That's why Evans is a scientist, and you are a sheriff. Evans' girlfriend, who's been berating him for not being manly or rugged enough, now changes her mind about him, and asks him to forgive her for thinking that way. Evans gets the town's respect. Even though he was seen as nerdy, he was the person who saved the day. This is a story of Clark Kent saving the day, not Superman. Physical strength was useless in this situation. It was up to science to save the day. And you can read a lot more into this if you really want to. Remember that superheroes were created right before World War II broke out in Europe. They were almost all strongmen or athletes of some kind. Then after World War II, superheroes lost their popularity. Once people saw the consequences of what happened when men solved conflicts with action and shows of strength on a global level. Afterwards, it was Albert Einstein whose invention of the atomic bomb stopped another world war from breaking out. Comics ignored larger-than-life characters for a while, but when crime and horror comics were neutralized and science fiction began to create new villains, it was science that was used to save the day. This was the biggest shift in superheroes that we've seen since Superman. The book also has a text story that is about a man going shopping for a miracle formula that makes everything better, including him. At the end of the story, the man no longer hates shopping. The remaining 3 stories of this issue are all told in comic book form. There is one where a grizzled man attempts to hunt the abominable snowman and in the process becomes the creature he sought. This is a sort of twist that was done by EC Comics and its imitators. The next one was drawn by Steve Ditko. It's about a wood sculptor who falls in love with his work. It turns out that the carving was of a beautiful woman who can talk to her creator, but only for 1 minute once a month. They confess their love for each other, and the woodworker goes to a gypsy who says she has a potion that can turn him into a wooden statue. He drinks it without paying her, and then as he turns to wood, the carving becomes human. The gypsy came by earlier to create a spell that would turn the wooden woman into a human. She leaves him, and the woodworker is trapped alone forever as a statue. This was another twist ending, like the kind EC Comics was known for. And there was a moral lesson in it about not cheating others or rushing into a decision without knowing the consequences. The final story is drawn by Don Heck. It's about a man who creates a television set that can bridge dimensions together. This seems like a great idea until strange creatures come out and grab him, trying to take him to their world. He shuts off the power, separating the dimensions again. The scientist then convinces himself that it was all a dream, but it's up to the readers to decide for themselves what really happened. So, what we have here are monster stories that would have used to be put into the horror genre, but are now put into the science fiction one instead. Atlas was unsure what would still sell to children who were still buying comics, so the majority of these were standalone stories, just seeing what would sell. But, as we're going to see, the monsters and ideas in many of these stories were going to be tweaked around a bit in order to create some of the most famous comic book characters of all time.